Hi, and welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing with the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kevin Aline. Coming up, the New York State Board of Regents has voted on a new state rule that will require private schools to prove that they are teaching basic educational subjects or risk losing government funding. A professor of education leadership, law, and policy from Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduate Center joined me to discuss what this victory means for future students. How will this new state rule improve the quality of secular education within private schools? Then, what started as a news report has become an exhibit at the Bronx Documentary Center in partnership with the Carbon Magnetic Photojournalism Award. Congo in Conversation showcases life in a pandemic through the eyes of photographers in the Democratic Republic of Congo. A photographer featured in the exhibit joined me to discuss how she used photojournalism to share stories about her life experience during a global health crisis. What are some themes Bronxites can expect to see in this exhibit? After that, many people have experienced what health professionals refer to as long COVID, yet many Black American women are often ignored when they report their symptoms to healthcare professionals. A social epidemiologist and assistant professor at Lamar University joined me to discuss her experience with long COVID and how that led her to create an online support group for Black women. Why do Black Americans make up the majority of patients with long COVID? And finally, on a mission to inspire young kids in low-income communities, the Humanity, Optimism, Opportunity, and Diversity Organization, also known as HOOD Organization, aims to connect with Bronx youth through fun educational trips, workshops, and more. The co-founder and president of the organization joined me to discuss their efforts to serve people within their community and to keep children off the streets. What is the importance of having the HOOD Organization available to people in the Bronx? So please stick around. Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kevin Aline, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. The New York State Board of Regents now requires private schools to prove they are meeting academic standards by teaching basic educational subjects like math and English. Hasidic schools are primarily the targeted schools for these new guidelines, and they could risk losing government funding if they fail to deliver. Joining me to discuss these guidelines is David Bloomfield, Professor of Education Leadership, Law, and Policy at Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduate Center. David, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to see you.
Now, can you first start off just by telling us a little bit more about the New York State Board of Regents? What are they all about and what is their purpose?
The New York State Board of Regents is a 17-member group of people appointed by the state legislature to be the board of directors for the state education department. They're the ones who get to approve these regulations that were just passed.
Now, they are requiring private schools to show proof that they are teaching basic educational subjects like math and English, but I'm really curious to know, are private schools guilty of skipping out on basic subjects like these?
Well, we don't really know because we haven't had those inspections that were supposed to be undertaken many years ago and just haven't taken place. So let's assume that almost all of these schools are teaching regular secular subjects. That's, after all, what a school is intended to do. But we're going to have to find out, and that is particularly regarding a small number of ultra-Orthodox Jewish yeshivas, which have had preliminary investigations and which have fallen short.
Now, I'm curious to know, Hasidic schools are primarily the targeted schools for these new guidelines. Prior to this, what freedoms did these private schools have in regard to their educational courses?
Well, they really haven't had any freedom in terms of the secular subjects. There's been a state law on the books for over a century that says all private schools, as well as public schools, have to have substantially equivalent secular programs. Now, certainly religious schools are free to have religious coursework many hours a day. And that's what Catholic schools do. That's what Muslim schools do. That's what ultra Orthodox and all Jewish schools do. The problem is whether they're complying with state law regarding secular education.
Now, can you actually tell us what kind of inspired this move to kind of learn more about whether these schools are actually teaching these subjects?
In 2012, an organization was created called YAFED, Young Advocates for Fair Education, and these were graduates of the ultra Orthodox yeshivas who felt that they hadn't received essentially any secular education in traditional subjects: English, math, social studies, the arts, science. And that's what they demanded of the state education department and Mayor Bill de Blasio, who was in charge of investigating these schools, to make sure that a compliant, legally compliant education was being provided.
Now, I'm glad that you mentioned that because I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. I know Naftuli Moster, founder of the Young Advocates, was a part of the group of people, as well as other people in this community have been advocating for this change. Can you just explain a little bit, maybe what those people were experiencing that kind of made them want to see this shift?
When Naftali graduated from an ultra Orthodox yeshiva, he was hardly literate in English. He had never heard of a molecule. He had never heard of the United States Constitution. And he really was unable to write even a simple essay. And that is what raised his awareness of this common problem in several of these ultra Orthodox Jewish schools, mostly in Brooklyn and upstate New York.
Wow, I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I had no idea to what extent a lot of these students were facing this. Now, can you just let us know, why do you think that, this has gone on for so long?
This has gone on so long because of the voting power of the ultra Orthodox in the state and in the city. And so they basically got the politicians to look the other way while apparently not complying with the law. Again, we don't really know. We need to have documentation. We need to have investigations to see whether children are getting the appropriate education that's required by law.
Now, if these schools fail to follow these requirements, they risk losing government funding. What does the government funding go towards?
The government funding goes towards multiple types of activities. There's supposed to be secular activities of these schools. We pay for transportation. We, the taxpayers, pay for security. We pay for textbooks. We pay for Title I, which is federal reading and math instruction. So millions of dollars. The New York Times said $1 billion over the course of 4 years in taxpayer money, federal, state, and local, goes to these ultra Orthodox yeshivas. And we have to make sure that taxpayers are getting bang for the buck, as well as legal compliance apart from the government funding.
Now, if they lose this funding, what would that mean for, the students and the teachers who attend those schools? Like, how will this affect them specifically?
Well, these services wouldn't be paid for out of taxpayers' pockets because these wouldn't be considered schools. And in fact, parents who send their children to these schools would not be complying with the compulsory school law because they have to be sending their children to schools which have these types of subjects. So how the schools are going to handle this, let's just hope that they get into compliance. They see if they're not providing substantially equivalent secular instruction, that they're going to have to do that with competent teachers, which is another part of the new regulations. And then parents and the public will be assured that an appropriate education is coming out of these private schools, which are perfectly free to be teaching their religious dogma, their religious practices, their religious documents, as much as they would like.
Now, according to the New York Times, many members of the Hasidic community are opposed to this. Why do you think there is so much pushback?
Well, if the opposition is against the new regulations. I think people misunderstand the regulations. There's been a lot of misinformation promulgated by the private schools, not only the religious private schools, but by the independent private schools, that somehow this is the government going into the schools and micromanaging the curriculum, and, as I say, restricting the religious parts of the curriculum, and none of that is true. Nobody likes to be regulated. So I understand that the yeshivas, the other religious schools, the private schools, don't want to have to be accountable. But they need to be accountable because education is a public good. We are all served by a population that knows English, science, history, the arts, and we are all disserved by people who can't speak English, write English, know basic scientific information to evaluate what's going on out in the world, and then to vote in an informed manner and not simply take direction from their leadership.
Now, I understand that a lot of these schools weren't given a timeline of when they had to show or prove that they are teaching these basic subjects. Do you think this is the best course of action, or should there be a timeline or something so that they can prove that they're teaching these subjects?
There are many problems with these new regulations. I think that they're too weak. And one area, as you point out, that they're weak is in timelines. This is an urgent matter. There are children not getting educated in New York City at public expense. We have to make sure that the timelines are short and definite, and not given discretion and over much time for planning and checking and planning again. This could take years. A child could go through their entire school career without a secular education before the government gets around to even inspecting them under the new rules.
Now, do you know if there are any details on how the state plans on ensuring that these schools are following the new state rule, or do you have any ideas on what they could do to ensure that they're following the new state rule?
Well, what has to happen under these new regulations is that the local school districts within which these private schools operate have to be inspecting the schools. That's a documentary inspection. But there are also these, they're called pathways, where a school could get automatic waivers from the requirements by simply being connected to a registered high school, by being connected to an accrediting organization. It's not really clear how many will be required to undergo individual inspections rather than coming under these pathway exceptions, which I don't think meet the requirements of the law. The law requires, in a detailed way, the study of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Holocaust, the Irish potato famine, the Underground Railroad. This is a matter of great need and detail, which these pathways don't necessarily cover.
Now, I know we focused on Hasidic schools, but will this apply to all religious and private schools?
Under the law, this has to apply to all schools. We can't carve out special targeting of religious schools as opposed to secular independent schools. We can't carve out an exception for Jewish schools as opposed to Catholic schools. So it's just a legal requirement that all of these schools have to be covered. They're covered by the state law passed by the legislature. So this is not administrative micromanagement. This is a matter that the New York State legislature a century ago and continuously has thought that it's important that all children learn to read and write English, to know science, to know history. This isn't a great ask, but sometimes it seems that it is.
All right, David, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. welcome back. Congo in Conversation is a new exhibit that is currently on display at the Bronx Documentary Center in partnership with the Cardnomatic Photojournalism Award. The exhibit showcases life in the Democratic Republic of Congo during the pandemic. Joining me to discuss her experience using photojournalism during a global health crisis and what viewers can expect from this exhibit is photojournalist Arlette Bashizi. Arlette, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. I'm so happy to be with you.
Now, before we talk about the exhibit, I actually want to know a little bit more about you. Can you tell me how you got into the world of photojournalism?
Thank you for the question. So let me start by because it's like my childhood dream. Before, I mean, since I was young, I've always have the dream to become a journalist. But while growing up, I get that interest to bring it more visually than on writing, on being working like on a radio or TV station. So that is how it started. Before I become a photojournalist, I've been working in a radio station company, but on the administration side. So while being there, I was working there, but trying to also learn how to do like reportage or like writing like articles. So that is how it started. And I was working there, but I was also going on Instagram looking for some journalist work and trying to get like inspiration. And I've also been putting some money for to buy my first camera. So that is how I started. I first get some inspiration on Instagram, and then I started also taking pictures first with my phone, and then continuing with my the first camera I bought.
That's pretty cool. Now, I know that you're based in the Democratic Republic of Congo. What is that experience like?
First, like uh, being a photographer in my community in Congo, it's a little bit difficult because people don't take it like a job, but for many people, they think that it's just a hobby. Then adding the point that I'm a woman, and in my community there is no, I mean, we don't have a lot of women who work as photographers, so that is also another issue. So I've been like, I remember when I told my parent and also some friends that I wanna be a photographer. They was like, "Are you serious? Like, you wanna let down your work? I mean, which already pay you, and wanna go to become a photographer?" That is not like, they didn't accept it, and it was a big challenge for me to begin. But for the like, one day I just decided to let everything down, especially when we started with the project Congo in Conversation. I just let it down, and then I go and start my career as a photographer. So it is not easy because in my community they don't think that photography or photojournalism is a job. Many people think that it's just a hobby.
So I'm so glad that you shared that. But your work was, considered a job or work because it was featured in Congo in Conversation. Can you actually tell me a little bit more about that? I understand before the exhibit, it was actually a news report.
Yeah, before the exhibition, before the exhibition, we okay, let me go from the beginning of the project and how I get involved in. So when I started excuse me, let me start again. So when I started learning on how I could become a photographer, how to do some reports, I went on Instagram and I text a message to Finbar O'Reilly, who was our curator on the project, and also the winner of the Prix Carmignac. And that is how we get in touch. Then when the project started, he could not come in Congo because of the pandemic, so he contacted like many photojournalists based in Goma, and that is how we started doing those reports. So as it was at the beginning of the COVID-19, many of us couldn't go out to work because they closed many things like schools and churches. So the city was a little bit quiet, not only in Goma but also in other parts of the countries. So that is how we started the project, and everybody was like doing a report in just in our community. So with the project we get that opportunity and possibility to document our daily life in our communities, and also getting paid and through that those reportage or that work we've been doing just in our community. That is how it went with the project.
Now, I want to know, what are some of the themes that are explored in Congo in conversation?
Excuse me.
Yeah, can you just let me know what are some of the themes that are explored in the exhibit Congo in conversation?
Mhm. So the different thing which has been exposed in the Congo in Conversation project, we have issues like about education, about COVID-19 and how it has been taking in I mean how it has been understood in my country. We have a subject about health, environment, daily life, and yeah, you have all of those different details and also subject which document daily life in the community. So those are the different subjects which have been exposed.
Now, a huge part of why this was created was to address issues facing the DRC during COVID. Can you tell us what your country faced during that time?
So first of all, with the COVID-19, when it started, people was really like they was really scared and was worrying about what could going to happen, because when like they said that they we will close like many offices, closing schools, closing jobs, and for many people in my community, you don't just have like a stable work which can allow you to get like still getting money without going out. So that was the first issue. Like people were worried about what they will maybe be eating without going out to work. The other issue was about school, because people was a little bit worrying, like they ask children to not go out to school, and the solution could be to start from home. But you also have that other issue that everybody don't have access to internet and also to electricity. So that was like many that was a part of many issues that my community have been facing of. And then
I'm
you
really
have
glad that you actually mentioned that, because we actually do have one of your photos where we can see some of the issues that you face. Can you actually just tell us a little bit, about the story behind what we're seeing?
Yeah, so the story behind that picture, as I told you, when we started, many pictures we've been taking them in our communities, and that picture and the I mean, it was the first subject on which I worked on, and I did it just at home. Like my little sister, they closed their school and she couldn't go out. Then they give them just like a homework to do at home, and there was like a power cut, no electricity, so she was using the light of a phone to do her homework. And that happened not only in my home, but also for to many people, because we had that issue of electricity and still have it right now in my country. Then the other issue was that they have been asking people to wear face mask to protect themselves. Then without working, they couldn't get money to buy those face masks. So we have been documenting such a subject and story which have been happening in the community.
Now, I think this was like a really eye-opening photo, and I'm so happy that you shared that. How can people actually see more and view this exhibit?
uh, for saying more on my work, first I have I have my Instagram account, and then I have also a Twitter, and that is where I share my work, and also to see more about the whole project and all the things we have been working on for the Congo in Conversation project. Just go on the internet and tap Congo in Conversation, and you will see all the work we have been doing during the whole COVID time, and also after.
All right, Arlette, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. My pleasure.
We'll be right back.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. Many Americans have reported symptoms of what health professionals are calling long COVID. However, for Black women, these symptoms often go untreated and ignored. Joining me to discuss her experience with long COVID and the support group she created in response to racial bias in the healthcare industry is social epidemiologist Dr. Margot Gage Whitfleet. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, can you first tell us a little bit more about long COVID? This is actually my first time hearing this term.
Long COVID is a term given for people who contracted COVID, but their symptoms lasted longer than the average about 2 weeks. So it's lasting for months and months and months and never seeming to really go away after the initial acute infection.
Now, I know that many people refer to those with long COVID as long haulers, but in your TEDx talk, you actually mentioned why you're not fond of the label. Can you explain why?
I'm not fond of the name long haulers is because the term implies that we're in it for the long haul as though it's never going away. And also when our nation experienced polio, for example, before the vaccine was in place, the people who contracted polio, they just had polio, and the ones who had long-term complications just had long-term complications from polio. We didn't call it long polio. So I'm not into a name that means that I might never recover.
And I like that you mentioned that because I think that we often learn a lot that you shouldn't identify somebody as something that they experience or they're dealing with because it's not part of their identity. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now, despite COVID being a huge concern in healthcare, why are some patients experiencing neglect when they report these prolonged symptoms?
I think that COVID was politicized early on in the beginning. As we heard yesterday, I believe, President Biden coming out saying that the pandemic is over. So COVID is still being politicized. And now Dr. Fauci is speaking out that that's not exactly what President Biden meant with his words. So a lot has to do with the fact that we're divided. So we weren't able to get on the same page early on about how to fight this pandemic.
Now, according to NBC News, Black people in America make up the majority of long COVID hospitalizations. Why do we continuously see this pattern with Black Americans that we're often, part of the group of people who are experiencing the worst health outcomes?
So even before COVID came into the picture, socioeconomic problems and disparities was an issue in our country. So we have an inequality in terms of the rate that Black Americans contract illnesses. So this was a problem long before COVID. Our diet, our weight, things that in terms of health was a large problem in our community before this even happened. And COVID just exacerbated this issue, really shone a light on the health disparities, like just with not having health insurance at the same rate as mainstream society, things of that nature. And then not only that, when we were the bulk of the frontline workers, especially women. That's something that we really don't think about. When we think about frontline workers, you might think about the doctors, but think about the people, the janitors, the people who clean the hospitals as well. Those are typically people of color, women of color. And so they got hit with this virus early on and brought it back to their communities.
Now, I was shocked to read that even as a highly educated health professional, you also experienced having your health concerns dismissed. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that experience?
I was shocked about that too. Not shocked in the sense because I knew the statistics. I've read about it in my work. I knew that having a baby in America as a Black woman is a very dangerous thing. That's why I didn't have my children here. I had them overseas in Europe. So I knew these things. But when it was happening to me firsthand, I didn't expect that I would become basically a subject, one of these research participants that I had been reading about. So I was surprised myself when it did happen. But thankfully, I was able to advocate for myself. And being a health expert, I felt secure in what was happening to me and to be able to speak with doctors. I can only imagine what women who are not in the same position as me experienced. So I feel really bad for those people who did not have the tools or the capabilities to advocate for themselves.
And I'm glad that you brought that up because I know that a lot of people often think, well, if my doctor says this, then maybe I am just over exaggerating, or they tend to lean into that. And I know that a lot of people have just been saying that oftentimes that is linked to racism in the healthcare industry. Can you tell me a little bit more about the history of that?
I think that's a long history in America. There is a lot of books on medical apartheid that you can read. A lot of progress we have made in gynecological medicine, for example, was built on the backs of Black women and the harms that came to them. So for me, I think it's unfortunate that doctors and medical staff bring their biases into the treatment room. And I do think that the medical community needs to move forward because we can't operate and have medical care for all if you're not able to drop your biases at the treatment door.
Now, I'm curious to know, I also, like I mentioned that I watched your TEDx talk. You said that you were actually a very healthy person and, you didn't really have a lot of health issues, even though you did, have COVID and you struggled with that. Did that play a part into why, doctors possibly didn't treat you with the respect that you were expecting because they maybe had this misconception about your health before even, actually knowing a little bit more about you?
I would like to say I had no prior health conditions whatsoever, not even some. I'd never even broken a bone. One of my doctors described me as being medically boring. I also didn't have a relationship with a doctor because I never went to the doctor. So when I presented in an emergency state. And the doctors would ask me first if I had taken something. So their immediate thought was, maybe this woman is on drugs. And this happened not only to me, but to a lot of Black women who came in for COVID symptoms. Some of them even got security called on them. So I don't think it was just because I was healthy. I think that would be too easy of an answer because it was happening to so many of us. And I completed a research survey in my healthcare group. And I would say that this happened to majority, more than half of the women who responded to the BIPOC long COVID survey. So it's not just about me being in good health. But one thing that it did have to do with, I will say, is that early on, the CDC didn't have any idea about COVID like we have now. So because I never had a fever, that really threw doctors for a loop because the CDC guidelines said that I was supposed to have a fever or a really strong cough to have COVID. So that was one of the issues that started me down the rabbit hole of not being believed by doctors.
Now, I understand that your experience led to the creation of an online support group. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes. So my husband got me into the online groups early on because he found some in Europe that's where they had actually started. And so I joined into these groups and I started seeing women, like all women, irrespective of color, reporting that doctors weren't believing them. So again, a lot of these women it was nothing to do with health. They just weren't believing them. And research shows that this happens often with women, especially when it comes to pain. When you compare a woman to a man with pain levels, that medical gaslighting is real and it does happen. And it's a pattern in the medical community. And so then when I started seeing Black women in particular getting security called on them, I knew that we would need to have our own safe space. So I started the BIPOC Long COVID support group.
Now, with the rise of issues like Black maternal mortality, many health organizations have made commitments towards addressing racial bias. Have you seen those efforts?
I think it's great. I support all of these efforts that are being made. I think we need more initiatives, definitely coming from the patient perspective. But I also think that it needs to be top down as well. And this needs to be systematically addressed in medical school curriculum because it's not being highlighted in the way that it should be in order to make real change. It's got to come from both places.
Now, the support group has changed and saved lives. Do you have any future plans as the support group continues to grow?
To continue supporting these women, bringing in experts to speak with them and sharing my experience, strength, and hope from what I have done to improve my quality of life. And we have some experts in the group who are doing their own thing. We have other women in the group who are also doing their own thing. So it's not just me, it's a community effort. And that's what makes this group really dynamic, is that we are able to get together and share our tips and tricks of what's working to helping us get a little bit better and a little bit more quality of life than what we have had for me, for almost going on 2.5 years now of being sick with COVID.
Now, how can someone who thinks they may be experiencing long COVID join this group or find similar support groups?
There's support groups all over Facebook. So I would say join them, because you're going to learn so much, and it's going to help you for when you go into your doctor's appointments to know how to communicate with your doctor and to advocate for yourself. It also might help you if you're so sick, because there's some people who are so sick that they cannot work. And if this is a woman, and especially a woman of color who is typically the breadwinner of the household, this has a severe impact on not only her, but also her children. This group also there's women in this group who are helping other women with their disability applications. So when we say a support group, we really mean a support group in every form of fashion of the word.
All right, doctor, thank you so much for joining me and sharing this information.
Yeah, thank you. You have a great day. Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. Organization Humanity, Optimism, Opportunity, and Diversity, better known as HOOD, is on a mission to create better outcomes for kids and teens in lower income communities. Joining me now to discuss the organization and its efforts is co-founder and president, Mohammed Magassa. Mohammed, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me on here. It's a pleasure.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about your organization, HOOD? The last time I met and saw you all, you were giving away backpacks for, back to school. So I'm curious to know, can you just tell us overall what your organization is all about?
Sure. So, as you mentioned earlier, I am a co-founder and the president of Humanity, Optimism, Opportunity, and Diversity, also known as HOOD organization. And I also have two partners on the team, my older brother, Maddie Mankin Magassa, and my childhood best friend, Travis Sika. And so a little bit about Hood organization. Hood is a youth-led organization that is designed to guide and inspire individuals to shoot for their dreams. And HO sets out to prevent the youth from succumbing to negative influences within our communities, which may ultimately lead them to their demise. So what we try to do is just expose them to both professional and entertainment careers, which will allow them to spend less time on the streets and more time on what they want to become in the future.
Now, as a co-founder, can you just tell us a little bit what inspired the creation of this organization and maybe detail, when the moment that you knew that you wanted to be a part of something like this?
Yes. So, growing up within the hood, like not only are we from the hood, but we noticed that people usually gave the word a negative connotation. And that's something that we really wanted to change. So we decided to put it in a positive light. And that's how we decided to make HOOD an acronym. And so HOOD stands for humanity, optimism, opportunity, and diversity. And those four words are something that we value, lessons that we try to give to children. And so they can definitely grow into successful leaders. And so we also started this organization because growing up, we definitely had the entrepreneurship trait in us, in which we didn't have too much resources, but definitely had ideas that we wanted to try out. So I believe that's like a big significance in which how we started HUD.
And can you actually tell me, when did this organization start? Like what year?
Yes, this organization started in 2019. And yeah, we recently got our 501c3 status. It's certified by the government. So that's amazing.
That is amazing. Now, can you tell us, why did you want to specifically focus on families from low-income communities? And, what are some of the obstacles kids and teens from these communities face?
Yes, so we actually wanted to work with families from low-income communities because, we come from low-income communities ourselves. And, we feel like that is the location where there is, less resources, less money, and just less opportunity. And so that's something that we definitely would like to change. As we go on with this organization, we try to help wherever we get a chance. And yeah.
And what
And
are,
some of,
some of the
I'm so sorry
obstacles
about
that
that.
kids and
Yes.
teens from those communities face?
Yeah, some of the obstacles that they face are definitely there's an undersupply of opportunities that can definitely have them see what they want to become in the future. There's definitely violence that impacts not only the youth but just everybody within the community. And usually when there is like high poverty, there is a high crime rate, and so that's something that we definitely got to keep an eye on and definitely see how we can balance resources within our communities.
Now, aside from the economic aspect, how is it more challenging growing up in poverty or in a low-income community compared to other communities? Like, what are some things that you see other communities get that, we don't necessarily get over here?
Mhm. So, just growing up in poverty, there is a lot of differences, especially when it comes to like not just creating bonds with the youth or within our environment, but just the interactions that we have. So, just living in poverty, I feel like it puts a huge limit on the way that we think and what we believe we can achieve, especially when it comes to our dreams. But we really try our hardest, no matter the environment that we're in, the circumstances that we have. We really try, our best to make it out, to really see how we can input into the lives of the youth, give them guidance and some mentorship, and definitely, things that we see that we don't have necessarily are like, let's say, for example, new parks, or just new opportunities when it comes to big brands. So those are things that we try to definitely bring over to low-income communities here within the Bronx and all over New York City.
And I also want to add that I think it's just important because there is this this rift or this uh, awkward relationship between members of low income communities with, FDNY or the NYPD. So I think it's great that you're trying to strengthen that relationship. Now, I also think it's important to note that a lot of the leaders in your group are men. Why was that so important to have that kind of representation, especially in communities like the ones we have here in the Bronx?
Yes, we felt like it was definitely important to have this type of representation of, all Black men on this organization because we want the youth to realize that you don't have to wait until you're like set to start giving back. That's something that we decided to do the moment that we had the chance, the moment that we thought it through, the moment that we, decided to reach out for some resources. And so we definitely tried to impact the youth, but just to make people see that they can, really do anything that they put their minds to, So having this organization full of young Black men like ourselves, we want other young Black men to know that they can definitely be in the same position that we are in now.
And I like that you mentioned young because I do also think that's very important. A lot of the times, youth, they kind of want to attach themselves to something cool. But if they see people who look cool doing this kind of work, it kind of will encourage them or inspire them. Can you talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
like why that's important as well?
Yes. So that is very important because growing up, we didn't see too much people like ourselves, giving back. And so there's like so many things that you can choose to do, but giving back isn't the first thing that comes to people's mind. So well, to go deep into my background, in the year of 2007, my family experienced like a tragic house fire, and it was a deadly house fire. And basically, it was a time that we really lost ourselves. It scarred us a lot, and definitely the community came through and they supported us in a time of horror. So I feel like that's something that truly made giving back 100% must for us in the future. And now with Hood, we're bringing things to life. And yeah, a huge thank you to the community for helping us out through that hard time.
And I'm really glad that you shared that because I think it's so important that, communities like the Bronx, we do stuff for one another. And, can you just talk about the importance of just having, people like yourself or people who are just, giving, available to communities in the Bronx?
Yes. So to have people that love giving available to people in the Bronx is definitely significant when it comes to impacting the lives that are around us and just the environment and just taking it into a positive direction. So we feel like just giving back that should be something that everyone does, no matter what you have, big or small. There's just a different type of feeling that comes with it, and yeah, that's something that we should definitely make a must for everybody.
Now, I want to quickly talk about, the collaborative work that your organization does because you do a lot of it in order to help the community. Can you tell me a little bit more about, just the collaborative work that you're interested in or that you do?
Yes. So, starting the organization, we didn't have too much resources. So we definitely looked out to a lot of the organizations like within our community or just the big brands that we always wanted to work with. And so one thing led to another, and we was able to get into a great cohort called the Elevating Black Leaders in Sports, which is handled by Laurier Sport for Good. And they was able to connect us to a lot of people. But it's just connections like that. We're able to grow our network. We're able to see how we can grow our impact. And that truly helps when it comes to just moving the organization forward and impacting lives around us.
Now, can you just let everybody know how they can get in contact with you or your organization?
Yes. So they can get in contact. Sorry. So everyone can get in contact with our organization by visiting our website at www.hoodorganization.org. We have a lot of content on there, and they can also visit our Instagram, IG at Hood Organization. And so we definitely have plenty of upcoming stuff, and yeah, please feel free to tap in and stay in contact.
Mohammed, thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. Truly appreciate this opportunity.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kim and Aline, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.